Hi, my name is Dave Reske, CEO of Now Speed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of Marketing in the Now, where we talk about the best ideas of digital marketing. And my guest today is Kristin Oelke, author of Trust: Unlocking B2B Growth in Today's AI World. Kristin, welcome to the show.
Hello, great to be here.
Great to have you. And I understand you're the managing director of BrightRose Ventures. You're also the CMO of Feedback Now. You've been a former CMO at Serious Support and Sys Group, so you've had some deep experience in the marketing world and digital marketing world. And I'm thrilled to be talking to you today about AI and some of the issues that you're seeing in the world as AI takes over more and more of our work and helps us be more effective. So thanks again for joining the conversation today.
I'm looking forward to it.
So you and I have been talking about a subject that's related to your book, and I'm excited about hearing your thoughts on this, and that is building trusts in today's AI-driven world, especially for B2B companies, which is around a lot of your experience. What are the issues that you're seeing in trust specifically as it relates to AI?
Sure. So with the ever increasing use of AI for communications and creating content and delivering a company's message, there is lots of research from very reputable organizations that is talking about the growing level of skepticism that parallels the use of AI. So as we use more and more AI and create content that people do not know what is factual and what is simply AI generated out of backed up information about this product or service or your company, that the buyer is now far more reluctant to engage in conversation, advance in meaningful sales conversations with you, and ultimately hinders buying. And the genesis of the book was actually when I was starting to think deeply in 2022, 23, as AI was being talked about, not as much usage, but then going into 23, I had a client who had a really interesting product. They were targeting very large, basically Fortune 500, primarily Fortune 100 businesses. But it was an early stage startup. They didn't have a lot of endorsements, may it be from other existing customers, big integrators, analysts. And when you think in the B2B environment, right, these big companies in this case, right, were not going to integrate a piece of technology into their infrastructure that had any risk associated with it. And so we had a lot of top of funnel conversations, but they stalled in the middle. And that is where I started to really think about this concept of trust, right? Can the finance person trust this to sign off on the procurement? Can the technology person trust this supplier to sign off on it? Can the risk and legal people trust it enough to sign off on it? And so the more I dug into it, it's interesting. There in recent years, about that time frame, there were these other organizations building out these annual research reports and then benchmarking it year over year. And they're PwC, Edelman, Forrester, all of them have a little bit of a take on this. But fundamentally, it's that there's this growing skepticism, which is putting blockers on the selling process.
Interesting. So, building trust has always been super important in the selling and marketing process. As you kind of think about AI, what are the unique differences that are happening today? How do you kind of think about that differently? And what new variables is AI bringing into the trust equation as buyers are thinking about what, products and services they might want to get involved in?
Well, I think there's probably a couple perspectives or views that you can take on it. One is kind of what I mentioned earlier in that how the company creates and publishes information about itself, right? With generative AI, it is so easy to have this incredible content machine, but the governance or risk controls around, is it accurate? Is it factual? Do you know what your teams are sharing? That I think is a risk that we're still trying to figure out how to manage, because even this morning I was reading an interesting article about you can't have, fundamentally the premise was you can't have enough content put out into the marketplace, and it's one that I'll definitely think about some more. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that as we move forward, we're going to have to really figure out how to still make sure that it is appropriately reflective of not just the product and service of the business, but who the business is, right? We're still, in my environments, B2B, you're buying from people still that have a product or service. And do they have the values that you want to consider in a partnership with this organization? So that's like one perspective. Another perspective, I think, when in your question, if I understood it the way you intended, was that there's also the AI within the product or service that you provide into the marketplace. One of my clients right now, Serious Support, you mentioned at the beginning, I'm their fractional CMO. They are leaning into this. Support was probably one of the first areas where AI was really taking hold within the go-to-market functions of an organization. And so Gartner says 80% of your support tickets can be covered with AI technology, but it's that 20% that you still need a human agent for those unique cases or unique users. They're still talking, like the older generations still are not comfortable with an AI agent, or with certain instances of products and services that you offer, you still need to have a human. And so this company is leaning into that. In fact, what's interesting, I don't know if you're following it here in the States, there's legislation at the state level. And then we're seeing some now surface at the federal level, with a couple senators proposing legislation around requiring identification. If you have a support function in your organization, they have to the legislation states you have to identify the location and if you're a human agent. Super interesting. So I think, when I think about how AI is impacting the business, it's in my particular realm of the world of how we share the story of the business and the product and our value into the marketplace. But it's also in how you deliver those products and services, and how you embed that in, and how you're able to ensure that, going back to full circle to this concept of trust, that your ecosystem, you're building trust with leveraging the efficiencies and the intelligence of AI, right? Rather than bringing down that score and making that relationship more untrustworthy.
Yeah, and making sure that there's quality all the way through. Let me ask you this: if the content, let's focus on content for a second. If content is good and high quality and meets the needs of the user, do you think users care if it's AI generated or if it's human generated? And do you think it builds more trust if it's human generated? Is that important to the
No,
user?
I personally don't.
Okay.
I personally don't.
So we could build content leveraging AI and be more productive. And that often that serves the needs of the user. Now, let me just bring up an example where this is my favorite example, my favorite recent example. You've seen these BDR bots, right? That kind of go out and then scour the market, and you send me a LinkedIn message. And I just got a great one that's as a business owner, I get like a couple of these a day, like, hey, we want to buy your company, kind of a thing of like some, I don't know, some company that's trying to do a roll up or some silly thing. Anyway, so one of my other gigs is I'm an adjunct professor at Boston College. So I just get this nice little message on LinkedIn. Hey, Dave, I'm Susan, and I represent this PE firm, and we're interested in acquiring Boston College. We think it'd be a great fit for you for our portfolio, and we're doing a little roll up, and Boston College would be an amazing addition to our PE community. And I'm like, it's so obviously a bad use of AI, right? So because they've just gone and taken the last profile, and I've been doing this professor gig for a couple of years, but I've been doing my now speed work as CEO there for 20 years. So they took the last profile and they assumed that that was my current gig, and so they want to acquire Boston College. So I was about to write them back, but I thought that would be a little silly because there's nobody on the other side listening.
You know what?
So
See how much you can get for
exactly, and there's probably a
it.
bridge in Brooklyn I can sell them to.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, so that's just kind of a classic example where we get enough of these, and I think that these automated bots, these sales outreach bots, are an example of that where I don't trust any of them anymore. It's like we get so many of them, the volume is so big that there's lack of trust. So how do you, as a B2B organization, with a sales organization, with a marketing team, cut through all of that and build trust and build an authentic relationship with prospects who really do need your products and services?
Mm-hmm. Well, I say it's through the voice of those who derive value from you, right? And so I talk about that a lot in terms of customers, partners. It is this concept of influencer that's out there, right? Who is trusted for their opinion and their voice, and how you can have them amplify your value in the market. The book specifically talks about different ways through, customers and customer advocacy. And I had a debate with someone online shortly after the book came out, and they're like, "Isn't this just what we've been doing for 20 years, right?" And I said, "Well, there's a component of that, and that's amplified. But what is really different now, and what I recommend, is that it needs to be done within the context of how we all operate, and that is very social now, right? It is not the old way of doing a customer story, right? Was that it was very well scripted, approved by a ton of different people, many filters by the time it actually got into the market. Now, the way that I explain it is that, and it builds further trust, is that it has to be your entire organization bringing that voice of the customer out into the marketplace. I'm working more now with the customer success people than I ever have within the go-to-market model, right? It used to be I spend a lot of time with product and getting the messaging ready, and then you'd work a lot with sales and trying to push it out into the market. But we didn't have as much of our energies focused with the success people and those that are continually using your product and service and understanding how they use it and the value. And that's where I'm at now. And so if you can get, when you're at industry conferences, when you're doing online activity, like that real time voice that's unfiltered, and it's not through the marketing lens, because you and I are both marketers, right? And there is this veil that we sometimes have, like, oh, that's marketing sent it, right? Oh, marketing created it. Well, there is some reality that in the perception of your buyer. And so if you can cut that off and be like, no, it's not, marketing didn't spend 2 months creating this video of your customer like we used to, right? This is me standing at an industry conference, with my phone and just, hey, can I just, record our conversation and take a few snippets about what you said and put it out there. So it's modernizing that, right? And trying to get that out there in more authentic, real time, the voice of those within your ecosystem and those that have the voice. We were talking about something earlier too, that I had to double think for a second real quick. And the voices can contradict too. And the example that I have is this morning, I actually got one big thinker on the concept of SDRs and another big thinker on the concept of SDRs. And one of them was like, the human SDR is dead. And then the other one is like, don't believe that human SDRs are dead, right? And so what I take from that is that in the end of all of this, kind of like to just try to put a little bit of a bow on it, is that you have to always come back to what is your business, who is your buyer, and where do they self-educate, right? And if they're more comfortable with a phone call, you need that way to connect with them with a human and not have them try and sell you or buy Boston College, right? Like that doesn't work with some audiences if you actually just sit down, right? You can't just take this box of tools and apply it you know across every opportunity in every business. And that's frankly a lot of what I do, and I think that is my takeaway over my career too, of that you have to be able to put your business opportunity in the right lens and apply the right people, process, technology that's right for that, and not assume that what is hottest today and what's being talked about today is always right for that situation.
So, the perfect interaction is where you have, in terms of trust, is like where the prospects may be talking to a senior executive in the company and they build a real relationship and they have that trust. But in large organizations, especially when you're scaling, you can't do that, right? You have to have people and content that communicates your message at all different levels. So, how do you think about trust maybe across the buyer's journey? So maybe, in the early days, do you think it's appropriate to have generic content that's maybe industry tailored or product specific that's really, a little, it could be AI generated, maybe it's a video. And then later, the buyer's journey, they want to get to know the company better. That's where that gritty, real video about the case study and that client testimonial comes in. And then deeper in the buyer's journey, it's a conversation with real people who've got, maybe a meeting these days, a real in-person meeting where you've kind of gone all the way in. So do you kind of think about, there's a trust journey that parallels the buyer's journey? Or do you think it should all, for B2B organizations, you should establish extremely high trust levels at every stage and, not violate that? How do you think about that?
uh yes, I first of all, I do think about it across the buyer's journey. My latest thing has been a lot more around this concept of being disruptive of the myths at the front end of the buyer's journey, so that you are showing them what the problem is, what the current problem is with the solutions that are out there, right? And so I'm doing some interesting testing right now with some short videos that are actually humor, and I have not always been a big fan of humor in B2B, but I think it's also a disruptive medium that, if used appropriately, can be very effective. And then in the middle of, when you start to move into the buyer's journey, that concept of trust really, I think, goes to, those endorsements. But the trust part also, I think, as you get to the middle and the end stage, is about performance. Do you have the validation points for them to trust the performance that you're stating you will deliver? Performance in services, performance in products. And there's different ways you can do that, right? Particularly in my space with technology. And then the trust part continues, when you think about the buyer's journey into what, is the customer journey, right? Once they onboard, in that, are you servicing them and are they getting that performance out of what they bought the way that you contracted with them? And so it's that trust along the entire buyer's journey, but it takes different forms throughout the journey, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got to build that trust all the way. We've been talking about trust with humans, obviously, but is there a different conversation or a different element of maybe building trust with AI? So, one of the things that we're working here on at NowSpeed is what we call generative engine optimization. So around SEO, we were building trust for a long time for search engines. So they would trust our contents, they would show us up. Now we're building trust for the LLMs, so they will represent us well in conversations. So is there kind of a different thing that we have to do now to build trust with the AI, or is that just, kind of irrelevant right now, and we'll wait to see how that all works out?
Um, what we haven't touched on yet, which I usually bring up earlier and I should have, the concept of trust inherently is about a relationship, right? You can't have trust if you haven't had this period of engagement in which you can now believe or trust what it is you're experiencing or hearing or seeing, whatever. And so I think, for your question about, marketing and what we put out there and SEO and comms, and like, it's not a one-time thing. And so if the AI is consistent and supportable or backed up, what it's generating and putting out there and how it's performing in the variety of things I just mentioned, right? If it's face-to-face or you're online, and how it's, surfacing in search and how all that is, if it can be backed up into that point of over time, that concept of time and the relationship, because it's still a relationship if it's digital or virtual as it is in person, right? And so I think it's that consistency and consistency in terms of actual factual information, that when they see the next piece of content or have the next conversation, it is consistent with everything else that they're aware of or know. And I think that helps to build that trust.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very powerful. I love the context of the relationship. I mean, I was thinking about dating. When you're dating someone, you build trust because you show up consistently as the same person over and over. You make a date, you show up for the date. You're going to meet somebody. You show up as your best self, perhaps. And the same thing has to happen in marketing, right? Well, we put all this content out. We put all these experiences out. Do you show up consistently over a long period of time to prove that you can deliver the value that you're putting out there? So very powerful ideas, Kristin. I think that this you're really in a very important element into this conversation about AI and how we can leverage it. So we're almost out of time. This has been an amazing conversation. If people want to connect with you and learn more about you or your services or how they can work with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can go to brightrose.com, and fundamentally, what I focus on every day is we provide what we call integrated fractional teams of marketers. So where a company is saying they need a marketer, most often they really need a marketing capability. And so what we do is we bundle all of these services into a one price per month fixed fee. And so they get the strategist, the campaigns person, the ops person, all for one price. And so it's really focused on what we call these businesses that are needing to transform to perform. So they're young, ready to scale, or they're mature tech businesses that they've kind of need to pivot. And so we help them pivot.
Awesome. Well, you're making a huge impact. And Kristin, thanks for taking the time to have this conversation about trust.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Have a great day.